We're here now with Yossi Hollander. Yossi is a serial high-tech entrepreneur and also a serial philanthropist, aiding the Jewish people, both here in Israel and in the United States. Yossi, it is a real privilege to have you here in our Jerusalem studios at JNS. Thanks for coming.
My pleasure.
Yossi, you have been, I think you've been really great in strategically mapping out the threats that Israel and the Jewish people face. Everybody knows that we're fighting against Hamas, we're fighting against Hezbollah, the Houthis are also attacking, and the IDF is responding. So there's soldiers on the ground. We're fighting a hard war. But I think you've correctly identified that the threats that Israel faces are much wider than the military battles. In fact, you've called this a soft war that Israel's facing. Can you go into a little bit more detail and just describe what the soft war looks like?
So the goal of the soft war is to delegitimize Israel completely in the public opinion and basically isolate it completely from its friend and make it like a pariah state like South Africa. And basically the idea is that if Israel will lose the U.S. support, Israel will have a much harder time surviving. They believe it will not survive, but it will definitely have much harder time surviving. So they've been busy for the past 30 years, most of them. And when I say they...
Yeah, this was going to be the question. Who's the
question is they. So I'll tell you who the five are, and then I'll explain what each one of them is doing, maybe one by one. But it is Iran, Qatar, and the Muslim Brotherhood. It is the progressive agenda hijacked by the Palestinians, and it is recently also China and Russia that have joined the fray in the last couple of years.
I mean, you just mentioned right there 2 billion people almost. I mean, that's a big, wide group of people that you say are aligned in some way, and Israel's fighting this war. What does all these 2 billion people have against the state of Israel?
So let's separate one by one. Okay,
sure.
I'll start from those who have nothing against the state of Israel, really. Okay, so the Chinese don't have anything against the state of Israel in general, but
to the contrary,
I don't know. They think that right now there's like sort of an axis forming between some of the bad guys, and the Chinese are part of them. But the Chinese are interested in weakening the United States and the West. And they have identified that encouraging anti-Semitism and going after Israel is actually weakening the West. So they're doing it not in order to, because they hate us or anything like that, etc. It's just strategically, it's part of their move to weaken the West.
So you're saying that the Chinese are actually strategically trying to increase anti-Semitism and to harm Israel in a wider campaign to harm the United States?
Absolutely.
Now, where do we see that?
So we see that mostly on TikTok. So TikTok today is the most popular platform for social media for young people under 24. By far, it is totally owned by the Chinese Communist Party. And the ratio of anti-Israel, anti-Jewish posts versus pro-Israel posts is 40-1.
Right.
And that's all by the algorithm. Okay, we know it's all controlled by the algorithm. It's not just because there are more people. It's all algorithm. It has nothing to do with a number of people posting.
Well, you think that this is a deliberate campaign.
Absolutely.
And obviously China is a communist country, and basically all companies are, to some extent or another, controlled or owned by the government. So you think that this is a top-down decision from the Chinese government to influence the algorithms on TikTok to delegitimize Israel?
Absolutely. We can see it, for example, if you look at how many times the Uyghurs, which are enemies of the enemies, so-called, of the Chinese government, are mentioned versus, let's say, in other social media platform, the ratio is like 200-1, the number of mentions. So they're definitely suppressing. Whatever appears there is directed from above. And it is connected, to the Chinese Communist Party. The United States have just passed a law to close down TikTok.
In the United States?
In the United States, yes. That they either be sold by January or be closed.
Okay, so that's the Chinese, and I don't want to spend too much time on this element, even though there's lots of questions about how we could fight that, if there's a way to fight that.
But there are people. So although you say there's 1.5 billion people there, but that's not exactly their main goal. We're just in the line of fire. Okay, but there are two countries, for example, that are specifically have a goal of destroying Israel and the Jews. The first one is Iran. So we know about Iran nuclear ambitions. We know about Iran surrounding Israel with Hezbollah and Houthis, etc., etc. But they also have, for the last 20 years, they have a soft war unit with somewhere between 10,000 and 20,000 people that produce web traffic, bots, influence on Hispanic media in South America. It's a pretty wide network with a lot of people.
I mean,
and
we've
a lot of money.
experienced even at JNS, since October 7th, our site has been continuously attacked by bots that are trying to take the site down. I know a lot of other Israeli companies and even infrastructures, hospitals and others reporting that their websites and systems are being essentially hijacked as part of this soft war with its origins in Iran.
Right, but there's two elements. This is what's called like this cyber attacks. And
Right.
Israel has a cyber center that's supposed to fight that, and I don't know how effective they are. We're not talking about it. It's not like but the issue that I want to pay people to pay attention is that they're focusing most of their resources not on interrupting the JNS,
Right.
but on influencing the majority of U.S. Americans. We know today that the majority of anti-Israel, anti-Jewish posts on all social media are not real people.
Really?
They are bots. And most of them come or originated from Iran.
I mean, we're seeing tons and tons of anti-Israel posts on social media from people that are real people.
No, they're not real people. A lot of them. So you'll have like somebody who's a social media influencer and suddenly he's rising to 200,000. 150,000 of them are not real.
So you're saying that what they're doing is you have an influencer. The influencer is gaining followers that are fake. And then once the influencer has more followers, then their strength within the Twitter algorithm grows exponentially.
Exactly.
And then they're actually able to reach more real people because of the strength of
Exactly. Take, for example, Kanye West.
Right. 'Cause
Okay?
I don't have any Iranian bots following me on Twitter as indicated by the low numbers of followers that I have.
Probably not. So if you look at Kanye West, so when Kanye West made anti-Semitic statement, they were amplified to over 100 million people. When Kanye West said his regrets and said that he was a regret and he made a mistake, it got to 3 million people.
Okay, so this opens up like a whole different line of questioning because we were just talking about TikTok a moment ago, and so TikTok obviously, as we said, is controlled, by the Communist Party to a certain extent. Twitter is owned by Elon Musk.
Right.
Okay, this seems like it's a major attack on, let's call it, the digital sovereignty of Twitter. If all of a sudden all these
It's not just Twitter, it's all of them.
Twitter,
it's,
Facebook,
Instagram, whatever it is that you want. It's most of the traffic out there.
Right.
Okay, against Israel is not real traffic, and the question is, how do you detect it? So there are people who are their expertise is exposing those kind of things, and they're operating. Okay, but we're looking at them. They have an advantage of 30 years, and we're way behind. So we managed to shut down some of this. Organization managed to shut down some of these accounts, but the amount is so large. And in reality, remember, the social media company don't want to shut them down because traffic is money.
Traffic's money, but is fake traffic money for them?
Yes, because people pay for how many views they got, and if it's fake or not fake. So whenever you report to them a fake traffic, they have to shut it down. But they're not trying too hard to find fake traffic. If 30% of the traffic on social media is fake, it's 30% less income.
So you're saying basically that Iran is creating tons of fake traffic in order that messaging should spread. Is this the only element of the Iranian software strategy? Like what?
No, there's many. I mean, you already mentioned attacking.
That's a cyber
cyber attack.
Sure.
But Iran, and especially and through their agent Hezbollah, for example, are very strong in influencing South America. There's a lot of ex-Lebanese there from Hezbollah. There's a lot of other networks there. And you can see, you can see that in social media there, but you can see it in news outlets. You can see it in distribution of Al Jazeera. You can see it on many issues. So the Iranians are very, very active in South America, politically and others to influence.
This is already for decades that they've been involved in South America.
Correct.
And Hezbollah is also reported to be involved in some of the drug trafficking from South America through Central America, even all the way up into the United States.
Correct.
So this is.
So it's a bigger network. So they're looking at all ways of influencing, financing, etc. So they're looking. They remember, Israel is not their only goal. Death to America is also something.
Death to Israel, death to America.
Okay.
The little Satan, the big
They're
Satan.
looking at it for a very, very long term. They build influence and disruption across the whole system.
What's their motivation, right? China, they want to become the world's largest economy, the world's largest superpower. Iran's
will is to, first of all, control the Muslim world, okay, because they still look backwards to 1,200 years ago or something like that, maybe a little bit more now, that the separation between the Shia and the Sunnis. So that's their one goal. But they deliberately created, they want to have Sharia law around their version of it around the world. They don't deny it. They talk about the little Satan and big Satan.
So when you look at the United States, they seem to have clearly identified that China is an adversary, right? But Iran, which is also trying to destabilize the world and continues to talk very openly about death to America, death to Israel. The Houthis are attacking American military vessels in the Gulf, and their proxies have been attacking U.S. infrastructures across the Middle East. America seems to, or at least the Biden administration seems not to have identified Iran as an adversary, let alone an all-out enemy.
So the Obama and Biden administration basically made I believe, okay, because at least by their action, made a decision that they're going to put their eggs in the basket of Iran and Qatar. So they think that the axis of Iran and Qatar is the one that they're going to support in the Middle East, and the axis of Israel, Egypt, Saudi Arabia is the less preferable one.
Why?
That is their belief. Okay, you can ask why this is happening. But why did it happen already under Obama? Why is the JCPOA and all these elements exist? Yeah. But clearly today, that's how they execute their policy. I mean, they have not done anything. They could have easily shut down Qatar, shut down all the money flowing to Iran. They don't want to.
Right. And you mentioned Qatar as being, one of the other elements working against the American interests, certainly against the Israeli interests. Now, we know, at least on the face of it, that most of Hamas's senior leadership is living in Qatar. Ismail Haniyeh, Khalid Mashal, others. The Qatar has been providing Hamas with funding for many years, that they've been negotiating on behalf of Hamas in the war with Israel. But we also know about the funding of universities in the United States and others. Tell me a little bit more about how this is wide.
I'm less worried about Qatar funding Hamas. And then Israel, if the United States will let Israel do what it needs to do, there won't be Hamas. It's the United States that is holding Israel back. But the real issue is the soft war effort of Qatar around the world. Qatar is trying to push Islamic Brotherhood across to control, take over Europe, take over the United States. It's a long-term plan, and destroy Israel in between. So I'll give you a few examples. So recently people discovered all the funding of universities, which is in the billions, okay? But it is way beyond universities. Qatar controls, basically de facto controls CNN, Washington Post, They have their own social media network called AJ Plus. Most people don't realize it. It's now number 3 among U.S.
It's Al Jazeera, essentially.
It's Al Jazeera Plus.
Right.
It's a social media network that is full of anti-Semitic and anti-Israeli content. It is now number 3 or 4 in the United States among young people under 24. It is number 4 or 5 in Europe among people of that age. So it's a huge effort in that regard, and a lot of money. They also have Al Jazeera regular, and people say, well, people in the United States don't watch Al Jazeera. They do. They just don't know that, because Al Jazeera has 70 offices around the world, and a lot of newsrooms buy their information from Al Jazeera.
Right, even if it's not listed as Al Jazeera information.
It is Al Jazeera.
We see very clearly in the mainstream media, and we talk about that a lot here at JNS, AP, Reuters. A lot of times the reporting is not that much different than what you would see on Al Jazeera. And certainly people around the world that want to know what's going on now inside Gaza. Trump said, the IDF shouldn't be putting out pictures. Israel's not really putting out much pictures and video of what's going on in Gaza. Al Jazeera has got a live feed of what's going on in Gaza all the time. So if people are watching what's taking place in Gaza, that's happening through Al Jazeera. But you said that Qatar also is controlling CNN and others?
Right. They control some of the media, but we have to remember they don't control the Fox News, for example, etc. Or a lot of other social media, but Israel is not fighting back, and the Jews are... You're looking at country resources like Iran and Qatar.
Let's double back to CNN for a second, because I think most Americans wouldn't believe that Qatar has influence over CNN.
So if you look at understand the economics of CNN, and if you ever traveled to Europe or to other foreign countries and you open CNN, you notice that most of the advertising comes from Qatar. Mm-hmm. Basically, without advertising from Qatar, CNN International would be bankrupt and would fit the rest of the organization. So de facto, what happened is that in the real world, Qatar can dictate a lot to CNN.
Okay, so it's the universities, it's the media.
It's high schools.
High schools.
So today, most people don't realize, but there's a big effort to insert anti-Israel, anti-Jewish material into high schools. It started 10, 15 years ago, but in the last 6 months, since October 8th, they tripled and quadrupled their efforts. Almost every week or two, we see a new organization out of the ground, funding operations, materials, and everything responsible for another area of the country. They keep popping up everywhere, and it's difficult to locate where they are. We can see the signature, but between that and proving that they are terror finance, etc., takes a long time.
Well, part of it also has to do with the universities themselves, because they're strategic in which universities that they choose. Right. You have these Title VI universities that they get actually taxpayer dollars in order to create curriculums for public schools in the lower levels. So, they're and in that way they're actually getting matching funds, so to speak, from U.S. taxpayers in order to be creating these materials that are going into high schools.
And they educate the educators. Okay?
Right.
So if the educators are... but a lot of it is curriculum. United States, unlike Israel, is very, very distributed. Every teacher can decide, every district, every high school. It all depends on the state. So you need a network with a lot of money, basically, to go from place to place and convince one another. And they don't care. Jews that want to fight it have to donate money to a 501c3, what they can do and not do. They're disclosed. They just pour money like no tomorrow. And they don't care if it's companies, if it's not deducted. They don't care. They're at war, and because it's working right now, they can see it's all working. They can look at, for example, how other people are organized. So if you're looking at the university riots, they're organized. They're not happening spontaneously.
Of course.
They're all organized.
Anytime you see the same phenomenon popping up in dozens of locations at the exact same time, in the exact same format, with the exact same tents and the exact same signage, it can't be spontaneous.
Of course. And you can identify two types of people there, okay? I would call them the Islamists and the communists, okay? Kind of in a broad stroke. So the Islamists, they're all a lot of the people there, we know them. Okay, you see those pictures. Oh, this is the guy that was student of Justice of Palestine,
Right.
which is eventually Qatar funded. Okay,
Right. This is the whole network on the campuses.
so we can see that. So we can see them already. Okay, so a lot of those people are definitely Islamist background, but a lot of others are communists. And you ask yourself, who's funding the communists? So you find on the one a Jewish foundation funding it. That's kind of wonderful, etc.
Sure.
But in reality, most of it is actually China and Russia.
What would make Qatar and Iran align?
So that's already a decision. So Qatar and Iran are aligned many times, okay, they're both enemies, but they're aligned because they both have a joint enemy, which is Saudi Arabia and Israel. They also have, they always have to cooperate because they share a gas field. So the gas field, most of Iranian gas and Qatari gas is one gas field that is split in the middle between the two of them. So they're interdependent in that regard.
Why are the Qataris and the Saudis at odds? I mean,
because one of them is Wahhabi and the other one is Muslim Brotherhood, and they compete on the control of the Sunni world.
Because we saw already, and this has changed, but maybe a decade, 2 decades ago, the Saudis were also part of this campaign to influence the university campuses.
Correct.
But there's been a...
They pulled back because Saudi Arabia made a strategic decision that they need to join the modern world if they want to survive. If they look, I believe MBS looked at the spreadsheet and saw two facts. One, expenses go up with the rise in population, and oil revenue go down as the wells being depleted over time.
But the Qataris made a different calculation in terms of...
The Qataris have 250,000 people and endless resources compared to Saudi Arabia.
Okay, so we're putting together a map. We talked about China. We've spoken about Iran. We've spoken about Qatar. You mentioned Russia.
Right.
Where does that fit in?
Same thing as China, okay? Weakening the West. Okay. So for them, riots in universities is a great thing to work on. By the way, Telegram is probably Russian KGB. That's what most experts say, okay? So if you have that on your phone right now, they're listening. But more than else, they're influencing. We see a lot of sites that they put up. We see a lot of other ways of influence where their goal is not Israel. Okay, now their goal has changed a little bit since Ukraine, because you can see the axis: Russia, Iran, China, South Korea. There is an Qatar. There is an axis of evil, shall we call that has been forming against the West. And the West is just waking up and still doesn't know what to do with all of it.
It was only a few years ago that Israel had reasonably strong, or at least respectable, relations with Russia, also with China. So you're saying that both Russia and China both identified that Israel's standing in the way, so to speak.
It's not Israel standing in the way. Is that disruption in universities, in schools, in everything like that, in the United States, okay, is to their advantage. I'll give you another example about Qatar and Muslim Brotherhood, so you understand. You say, how come Qatar cooperate? How does the Muslim and the communists cooperate with one another?
Right, because we're basically establishing, and it's very easy to understand, for Iran and for Qatar, the anti-Semitism is genuine.
Right.
Right. But here you're saying with China and Russia, the anti-Semitism serves their interests.
It's not necessarily. Right, it's a tactic.
It's not genuine.
It's not genuine. Most Chinese actually love Jews. It's the other way around.
Right. But once you're training them to become anti-Semitic.
No, it's not internal, actually. It's only external.
So you're saying that the messaging, for example, on TikTok, and we've already seen this, it happens, like we on TikTok, for example, in the United States, you see people twerking and acting like idiots, and this is going through the algorithm. In China, on TikTok, you see people excelling in engineering and stuff like that. So you're saying that the anti-Semitism, that's not penetrating.
That's not internally. It goes outside.
It's just being exported.
Right. But I'll give you another story. In 1968, there was a conference in Azahar University in Cairo after the 67 war. And attending were all the big radical Muslim scholars, Wahhabis and the Muslim Brotherhood. And they made a decision to use anti-Semitism as a tool against Israel and the Jews, because both the extreme left and the extreme right will adopt it and will ignore all the bad things they're doing to women, gays, etc.
Right. The right always talks about the extreme left. The left always talks about the extreme right. And people assume that this is a line. But actually, in reality, the extreme right and extreme left, it's like a circle, and they meet at the bottom.
Right.
Right. And then they align on the most extreme issues. Okay. So I want to move this towards the United States, because the United States seems to be the primary target. If Israel's not the primary target, America's a primary target in this. And, all this information war is being laid out. Universities, high schools, social media, all targeting the United States and maybe other Western countries as well. So, let's move this into the United States. We're seeing anti-Semitism skyrocketing right now. And, obviously, increase in violent anti-Semitism, but as you were talking about the soft war, there's also this soft anti-Semitism, and maybe there is bots and maybe there's Qatari control, but the populace, especially young people, it's worked, and we're seeing them repeating those anti-Semitic messages on campus and on social media, and even in one-on-one conversations. What's happening?
So I think we have to look at the understanding that in the last 20 years, there's a fight on the power control in the United States between four groups: traditional Democrats, traditional Republicans, Trump, MAGA, let's call them, okay, and progressives. The Palestinians have already identified the progressive as a vehicle to ride on already like 15 years ago. And they've been riding the progressive wave. Today, we're in a situation where progressive, which are only 8% of the United States, have way out of bigger influence on the current administration, by far. They maybe even dictate what's going on.
Right, and that's not just in Congress; it's also in State Department and
everywhere.
Defense Department.
It's in Defense Department. It's district attorneys. It's universities. Universities are in total control today. Okay.
Well, the district attorneys, that was a specific campaign to actually take over the state prosecutors and the district attorneys.
And it's nothing to do with Israel. It's about the fight to control the United States.
That's America.
It's nothing to do. It's control America. What the Palestinians are doing is they're riding it. So part of the progressive agenda is the whole idea of critical race theory or DEI, which basically says that the world is divided by race and preordained. So you are either an oppressor or an oppressed.
Right.
And you are either, and there's no way you could be successful without oppressing somebody. So it's not just a question of color, okay? Color is a definition of success or not success. If you're a successful black person, okay, then you are already an oppressor, because there's no way you could become successful without being an oppressor.
Right.
So therefore, all the majority of Israelis are basically brown, okay? It doesn't matter. Israel is a successful entity, therefore it's an oppressor.
But Israel should have been the very model of intersectionality, of peoples that went through a genocide in the Holocaust, a real genocide, 6 million people killed, an ethnic cleansing of 850,000.
You're talking facts. The whole idea of facts have disappeared with DEI and critical race
But Israel
theory.
should be the model for what you do with the persecuted population.
You're in the wrong conversation. You're talking facts. Facts don't matter anymore. It's how people feel and what they call systemic racism. And systemic racism is if you are unsuccessful, if you're whatever category that they want you to fall in, then the rest has oppressed, colonialist, bad person, etc. There is whether you worked hard for your money or whether you didn't work hard for your money, your position dictates what you are.
Your present position.
Yeah, your present position. There's no facts involved.
And no context. But one of the other things that we're seeing the progressives doing, and through the district attorneys and the state prosecutors, they're really tearing down the whole concept of law and order, specifically in cities.
Right. And that's where the communists love that. Okay, both China and Iran and all the money. That's why they helped them many times. Okay, but this is really funded internally, most of it.
Right.
So we're looking at Soros, Open Society Foundation. We look at the Tides Foundation. We look at Rockefeller Brothers. There's a lot of foundations that basically are pushing the progressive agenda.
And for what? What's the gain?
That's what they believe in. Okay, what is the gain of the Communist Party in America? Okay, who would believe that communism that we thought was dead is now basically what you were talking about? All these progressive ideas is a communist, Nazi communist ideas. Okay,
right.
In new dress.
And now they're really influencing the mainstream Democrat also, because you're seeing even members of this old guard now, like Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, basically afraid that progressives are going to out-primary them. And so we see them with their policies, basically abandoning Israel, right, even though they were long-term friends of the Jewish state, and kind of throwing them under the bus in order to appease,
So Schumer doesn't have primaries for quite some time, if I recall, another 5 years, if I recall correctly, and Pelosi doesn't care anymore. But that's not where the issue is. The issue is who controls the money to the Democratic Party in this election, and who controls all other primaries, not them, and also the influence on some of the media that supports them, like CNN and Washington Post, etc. So they're looking. This is part of the fight right now for November. So we're looking now. They're making a lot of mistakes. I think most Americans, when they see a kafia on the head of statue of Benjamin Franklin, actually say, "I don't want that." But the way they're looking at it is that they cannot fight and they have to cooperate with the extreme left.
Now, we're also seeing this phenomenon on the right. I don't know if you call it the MAGA movement, because I think a lot of the MAGA movement is still, they would define themselves as evangelical Christian to an extent, and there's pro-Israel in there. But you're certainly seeing this, I guess there may be self-defined libertarian strain of the Republican Party, maybe demonstrated by Candace Owens or Tucker Carlson and others that are basically now also trying to lump Israel together with Ukraine and realize that the Democrats are supporting Ukraine. And
so you have to separate two different things.
Sure.
Okay, both parties in the United States always had an isolationist group inside each party. It's traditional. It's like it's from before World War I.
And it makes sense in a way.
Before World War I, okay?
Yeah.
So there is isolationist in the Republican Party, like Rand Paul, and there's a lot of isolationist in the Democratic Party. There's always been a minority, and they always go stronger. When they go stronger, like before World War II, for example, they prevented the United States from getting into the war much earlier. The result, usually, when they get stronger, is World War and a lot of destruction. So first of all, you have to understand this is a process that it's not new. It exists. And it always goes up and up in reaction to what's happening in the world. Tucker Carlson specific is just an anti-Semite. Call it what it is. Okay, he is what he is. Okay, and it's not part of the Republican Party. Okay, in that regard, it is not. MAGA is by far not an anti-Semitic movement. Okay, and if you look at statistics and the surveys, the Republican Party is by far more pro-Jewish and pro-Israeli.
Trump voters, if you look at Trump voters, they're much more likely to support Israel than
correct.
And people that support Israel first are turning around and saying, "Hey, one party supports Israel, one party doesn't."
Correct.
But I think one of the things that you've pointed out in some of even the papers you've put together and some of the interviews is that yes, there's definitely anti-Semitism on this side, there's anti-Semitism on this side, but for some reason you're saying that the Republican or the right-wing anti-Semitism is not institutionalized in the same way that it is in the
so look, we always had, so we have a lot of money devoted to fighting right-wing anti-Semitism, basically Nazi variation, of it, since World War II. And although as Jews, we never eliminated it completely, we kept it out of the public eye. We kept it in the minority group. Yeah, it never got. When there was a congressman that became anti-Semitic, he was removed from all. Let's say,
it's like
in
the shadows. So, for example, yes, you have like 4chan, for example, but the entire public.
The entire public. The entire public
doesn't frequent 4chan, right? It's a underground
exactly. So they exist still. They still exist. Okay, they didn't disappear. And today, they have the same amount of money that they used to have, which is almost nothing. But today, with social media, with the same amount of money, they can look bigger than what they are. But in reality, it's a small minority, and they do not have any influence on any of the power centers of America, zero influence. The left-wing anti-Semitism controls or have huge influence in many of the power centers of America. And with Islamist influence like Qatar coming to a lot of other places, that's a very deadly combination.
Okay. You're laying out a very depressing picture over here, because you're basically saying that, yes, we have the Iran and Qatar that are, wildly anti-Semitic, want Israel destroyed. But then, for various reasons, the Chinese are supporting them. Russia is part of the Axis, and you have the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, and we didn't even begin to really touch on the other international institutions, the UN, the International Criminal Court, the International Court of Justice, and a lot of the power centers in Western Europe, which are all aligned with these international institutions and the Democratic Party, right? So, yeah.
Well, if you look at Europe yesterday, there was Europe is waking up to the Islamists, mainly the Islamist threat and the Russian threat. Okay, both of them. So you could see it in the results. I think you got a hint on the election,
right,
on the Eurovision Song Contest.
Uh-huh.
The judges, which were political, didn't give a point to Israel.
Right.
And then we got first among the people. So the people of Europe, I think, are seeing what's going on. And you saw yesterday the huge rise of right-wing parties in the European elections.
And of course, in all the media, it's far right, extreme right.
It's not far right by far. It's just regular people, okay?
Yeah.
Like everything that is not extreme left for them is far right, okay?
And here too, by the way, Israel's government is far right. It is.
I'm not going to go into...
We'll not...
We'll stay.
We're just talking about the
Israel is living in such a different reality, okay, than Europe. Israel is a growing country, okay? We have 3 kids per family, secular family, okay, here. We have per woman, okay? In Europe, we have 1.1 to 1.5. I mean, they're shrinking. It's a whole different culture. We comparing Israel to Europe, it's like doesn't make any sense. We're a growing society. They're a decaying society. 2 different things. So with the fact that we don't agree with one another and we're right and left wing, etc. What's new?
Yeah, and it's not unlike
the times of Joseph and his brothers. Jews didn't agree with one another.
And it's not unlike what's going on in the United States or in France or any other country.
Exactly, that's not a big deal. What you have to I think the reality is that there is a wake up around. Okay, the question is, what will happen in the United States right now? I think the support for Israel overall has risen as a result of what's happening lately. It's certain groups like progressives and young people where Israel has a problem with.
Okay, but let's say that that Americans have woken up and they realize, wait a second, our ally is Israel. They share our values, religious values, cultural values. The Iranians, the Qataris, the Russians, the Chinese, they don't support our values.
Yeah.
But
these are the older ones. What about the people educated in schools?
Exactly, the younger ones. But also, even so, they're not organized in a way, and even if, let's say that that Donald Trump would be elected, and this isn't that wing of the moderate Republican Party still doesn't control the State Department. It still doesn't control the Defense Department. It still doesn't control the universities. It still don't control the media outside of Fox.
The fight to the control of America. First of all, we have to remember, the fight is not about Israel. The control of America between progressives and all the other 3 groups will continue over the next 30 years. This is the story of American politics over the next 30 years, okay? But Israel doesn't have America will survive that fight. Maybe. But Israel will not. So Israel needs to start fighting, okay, understanding what it is, etc. Israel and Jews. Okay? So Israel can deal with Iran and Qatar, for example. Israel should not be the one dealing, it cannot, with education in the schools in the United States. So both.
But Jews
needs to wake up.
But Jewish philanthropists can deal with that.
Yes, and they're starting to.
Right.
So I think there is an expression, I would say, called October 8th Jew.
October 8th Jew. Okay.
which is people woke up in October 8 and realized their life have changed because everything they believed in before has changed. It doesn't matter who you were, right, left, etc. You understand things are now different. And more people that never gave anything to Jewish causes are now changed their philanthropic preferences and are devoting more. Now, it's going to take time to get organized for people to understand what works and what doesn't. But I think we can fight both Israel and the United States if we devote the right and Jews in the United States and Christians who are on our side. And I believe we can actually change that. Okay, I think we're actually stronger, smarter, etc. We just don't fight right now.
Also, I would say my experience, at least in the Jewish world, is that there are really remarkable people who are kind of entrepreneurs, either in philanthropy and organizations,
right.
And yet you don't see the same type of top-down structures that you would see with Iran, with Qatar, with the Chinese, with the Russians, with the progressives and the funders of those organizations.
Right. So if you look at Jewish organizations historically, they were founded to serve a purpose. So if you look at the federation system, the purpose was to help immigrants coming from Russia, Poland, post-World War II, from Russia after the communists, been absorbed into the United States. That was the main reason for the federation, okay? Yeah. It wasn't to fight anti-Semitism. If you look at most of the organizations that do fight anti-Semitism, they were designed and built to fight right-wing anti-Semitism because we did not have, that was the majority of the anti-Semitism we were worried about after World War II especially.
Right.
So we now have a completely new types of anti-Semitism, state-funded, like the Islamist one, like Qatar and Iran, and the progressive one, which is a whole new mechanism. And people still are figuring out the ways to deal with it. I think eventually there'll be institutions that will be funded, or groups of young entrepreneurs or older entrepreneurs that will build the system to fight it. But it is still in early formation.
But if you look at there are so many organizations today that have been formulated specifically to combat anti-Semitism, counter anti-Semitism.
Not that many.
Oh, I would imagine, just thinking of a few off the top of my head, that the Jewish community in the United States is investing every year, maybe $200 to $500 million.
Most of it has gone to fight over the years. Have gone to fight right-wing anti-Semitism. It's only now that people are, oh, wait a second, what are we going to do about schools? What are we going to do? I mean, think about schools. The Nazis never penetrated this education system.
Right.
Okay? It wasn't a problem. Now we have both universities and high schools and middle schools and even a third grade. Okay? It's a whole new, nobody knows. What are we going to do? How many organizations are dealing with it? Very few. There's not a lot of money.
And it's a race against time.
It's a race against time, and the amount of money on the other side is much larger. So we have to figure all this out. Jews in the United States have to wake up and figure out how they're going to fight it and put the money and the resources.
Okay, but leave us with a little bit of optimism.
And it's not about Republican or Democrat.
Right.
Remember, it's not that. It's progressive and Islamists that we have to fight.
Right, it's the extremes on the sides, but that are encroaching and grabbing influence in the middle. Yeah. So is there any way to leave us with a little bit of optimism here at the end?
Well, we survived a lot as Jewish people. I think we can survive this too, but it's like, you can't leave it to God, okay? God gives you the tools to fight, okay? We have the tool, we have our brains, we have our resources. Jews are relatively wealthy in the United States. We have resources. We are in a lot of power centers. We understand how the American system works. Most of Americans work with us. We just have to start fighting.
Yossi Hollander, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.